As big tech firms wrestle with how to keep false and harmful information off their social networks, the Supreme Court is wrestling with whether platforms like Facebook and Twitter, now called X, have the right to decide what users can say on their sites. The dispute centers on a pair of laws passed in the red states of Florida and Texas over the question of First Amendment rights on the internet. The Supreme Court is considering whether the platforms are like newspapers, which have free speech rights to make their own editorial decisions, or if they're more like telephone companies that merely transmit everyone's speech. If the laws are upheld, the platforms could be forced to carry hate speech and false medical information, the very content most big tech companies have spent years trying to remove through teams of content moderators. But in the process, conservatives claim that the companies have engaged in a conspiracy to suppress their speech.
The story will continue in a moment.
As in this case, a tweet in 2022 from Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene falsely claiming that there were extremely high amounts of COVID vaccine deaths.
I have not misled anyone. I've not put out misinformation.
Twitter eventually banned Greene's personal account for multiple violations of its COVID policy. Facebook and YouTube also removed or labeled posts they deemed misinformation.
Big tech's out to get conservatives. That's not a suspicion, that's not a hunch, that's a fact.
Confronted with criticisms from conservatives like Congressman Jim Jordan that the social media companies were censoring their views, and because of cost-cutting, platforms began downsizing their fact-checking teams. So today, social media is teeming with misinformation, like these posts suggesting tanks are moving across the Texas-Mexico border, but it's actually footage from Chile. These are AI-generated images of, well, see for yourself. With social media moderation teams shrinking, a new target is misinformation academic researchers who began working closely with the platforms after evidence of Russian interference online in the 2016 election. Are researchers being chilled?
Absolutely.
Kate Starbird is a professor at the University of Washington, a former professional basketball player, and a leader of a misinformation research group created ahead of the 2020 election.
We were very specifically looking at misinformation about election processes, procedures, and election results. And if we saw something about that, we would pass it along to the platforms if we thought it violated one of their policies.
Here's an example, a November 2020 tweet saying that election software in Michigan switched 6,000 votes from Trump to Biden. The researchers alerted Twitter that then decided to label it with a warning. I understand that some of the researchers, including you, have had some threats against them, death threats.
I have received one. Sometimes there are threats with something behind them, and sometimes they're just there to make you nervous and uncomfortable, and it's hard to know the difference.
This campaign against you is meant to discredit you, so we won't believe you.
Absolutely. It's interesting that the people that pushed voter fraud lies are some of the same people that are trying to discredit researchers that are trying to understand the problem.
Did your research find that there was more misinformation spread by conservatives?
Absolutely. I think not just our research across the board looking at the 2020 election found that there was more misinformation spread by people that were supporters of Donald Trump or conservatives. And the events of January 6th kind of underscore this.
USA! USA!
The folks climbing up the Capitol building were supporters of Donald Trump, and they were misinformed by these false claims, and that motivated those actions.
This is wrong. We know it's wrong, and it's about protecting the First Amendment.
Ohio Republican Congressman Jim Jordan is chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. So how big a problem is mis- and disinformation on the web?
Well, I'm sure there's some, but I think, our concern is the bigger problem of the attack on First Amendment liberties.
Congressman Jordan's Judiciary Committee produced a report that concluded there's a censorship industrial complex where the federal government and tech companies colluded with academic researchers to disproportionately silence conservatives, which Kate Starbird vigorously denies. But Congressman Jordan says her group unfairly flagged posts like this tweet by Newt Gingrich. Pennsylvania Democrats are methodically changing the rules so they can steal the election.
What I care about is the ability to speak, and to speak in a political fashion and not have the government come after you for doing so.
He complains that government officials put pressure on social media companies directly.
A great example, 36 hours into the Biden administration, the Biden White House sends a email to Twitter and says, we think you should take down this tweet ASAP.
Just a call alone from the government, he says, can be unnerving.
You can't have the government say, hey, we want you to do X, government who has the ability to regulate these private companies, government which has the ability to tax these private companies.
He says that White House email to Twitter involved a tweet from
Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and everything in the tweet was true.
That tweet implied falsely that baseball legend Hank Aaron's death was caused by the COVID vaccine. Did they take it down?
Turned out they didn't, thank goodness.
And that post is still up. Kate Starbird says the social media platforms also often ignored the researchers' suggestions.
The statistics I've seen are just for the Twitter platform, but my understanding is that they responded to about 30% of the things that we sent them. And I think on the majority of those, they put labels.
But just a third.
But just a third, yeah.
And do you suspect that Facebook was the same?
Yeah.
These platforms have their own First Amendment rights.
Katie Harbeth spent a decade at Facebook, where she helped develop its policies around election misinformation. When she was there, she says it was not unusual for the government to ask Facebook to remove content, which is proper as long as the government is not coercing.
Conservatives are alleging that the platforms were taking down content at the behest of the government, which is not true. The platforms made their own decisions, and many times we were pushing back on the government.
Can we talk about a specific case? It's of Nancy Pelosi. It's a doctored tape where she looks drunk.
We want to give this president the opportunity to do something historic.
This was the video of then House Speaker Pelosi, posted to Facebook in 2019, slowed down to make it seem that she was slurring her words. Did it come down?
It did not.
Why?
Because it didn't violate the policies that they had.
So did she put pressure on the company to take it down?
She was definitely not pleased. She definitely
Is that a
wanted the
yes?
company, yes. And it really damaged the relationship that the company had with her.
The Conservatives' campaign faced a setback at the Supreme Court on Monday when a majority of the justices seemed poised to reject their effort to limit attempts by the government to influence social media. The court is deciding in separate cases whether the platforms are like news organizations with a First Amendment right to control who and what information appears on their sites. Congressman Jordan argues that the tech companies shouldn't remove most of what they call misinformation.
I think you let the American people respect the American people, their common sense, to figure out what's accurate, what isn't.
Well, what about this idea that the 2020 election was stolen? You think that these companies should allow people to say that, and individuals can make up their own mind, and that there should be...
I think the American people are smart. Look, I've not said that. What I've said is there were concerns about the 2020 election. I think Americans agree with that.
No, they don't.
You don't think there were concerns with the 2020 election?
Most people don't question the result. That's all I'm saying. They don't question whether Biden won or not. Right? Right. Most people don't question the outcome.
Right.
X basically did what Jordan proposes. After Elon Musk took over in 2022, Most of its fact-checkers were fired. Now the site is rife with trash talk and lies. Little would you know that this, said to be footage from Gaza, is really from a video game. Eventually, ex-users added a warning label. In this post, pictures of real babies killed in Israeli strikes are falsely dismissed as dolls.
The toothpaste is out of the tube, and we have to figure out how to deal with the resulting mess.
Darrell West, a senior fellow of technology innovation at the Brookings Institution, says the clash over what is true is fraying our institutions and threatening democracies around the world.
Half of the world is voting this year, and the world could stick with democracy or move towards authoritarianism. The danger is disinformation could decide the elections in a number of different countries.
In the U.S., he says, the right wing has been flooding the internet with reams of misleading information in order to confuse the public. And he's alarmed by the campaign to silence the academic researchers who have had to spend money and time on demands from Jim Jordan's Judiciary Committee. There are people who make the accusation that going after these researchers, misinformation researchers, is tantamount to harassment, and that your goal really is to chill the research.
I find that it interesting you use the word chill because in effect, what they're doing is chilling First Amendment free speech rights. When they're working in an effort to censor Americans, that's a chilling impact on speech.
They say what you're doing, they do, is a violation of their First Amendment rights.
Us pointing out, us doing our constitutional duty of oversight of the executive branch, and somehow we're censoring, that makes no sense to me.
We, Americans, we're looking at the same thing and seeing a different truth.
Well, you might see different things. I don't think you can see the different truth because truth is truth.
Okay, the researchers say they're being chilled. That's their truth.
Yeah.
You're saying they're not. So what's the truth?
They can do their research. God bless them. Do all the research you want. Don't say we think this particular tweet is not true
Well, that's their First Amendment right to say that.
Well, they can say it, but they can't take it down.
Well, they can't take it down, and they don't. They just send their information to the companies.
But when they're coordinating with government, that's a different animal.
Okay. Well, of course, they deny they're coordinating. We just went round and round.
I wonder if there's a way to measure the shifting meaning of misinformation.
Starbird says she and her team feel intimidated by the conservatives' campaign. So while they will continue releasing their research reports on misinformation, they will no longer send their findings to the social media platforms.
How pre-bunking misinformation works.
We want to empower people to see through manipulation and make up their own mind.
At 60minutesovertime.com.
Look at what's happened to Twitter.